Here we go.
So we'll start off, as we mentioned, by kind of doing a little introduction. First things first, I'll just kind of kick it off. I'm Kiley Grant, and been an entrepreneur on my own for around 2 years. Before that, I was pretty entrepreneurial in my tendencies, but I had corporate jobs and everything else before then. Kind of broke off on my own 2 years ago, and have been gaining experience probably since I was 20 years old. And you go ahead.
Hello, I am Brady McNaughton. I've been an entrepreneur for about 7 years now. I have a small technology agency. It's about 10 people. And I also have a vending business with Kiley.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty much my portfolio, other than a few stocks, which I would consider enough to consider a real business at this point. But that's kind of the area I play in.
Yeah, so we just kind of had the idea on our actual, and when we're servicing our vending business, that we want to use a podcast as a format to kind of express our knowledge to each other as
Right.
much to anybody else. And so we thought, why not start recording it? At the end of the day, it's only something we can look back on, and we think we may have some beneficial things that others can learn from too. So, we thought, why not? So we're gonna try and do that. That's gonna be more the format of this right now. It's gonna be pretty conversational, I think. Ultimately, if we think anybody else can offer advice to us that we can benefit from, it will be maybe more of an interview style. But we're not sure where this is going to go. I think it's gonna be fun for us, and we hope that there's some knowledge imparted.
Yeah, so I guess just to highlight the goals, one is to, share our experiences as entrepreneurs. Two is to learn by teaching and sharing and seeking answers to questions.
And there's a theme there, right? Because we generally, we've so let's bring jiu-jitsu into it a little bit. Let's bring
Right,
jiu-jitsu.
it already crossed my mind.
Yeah, we've both been doing Brazilian jiu-jitsu for 4 or 5 years, and I'm certain we will go down these rabbit holes regularly on how it's applicable to life. But generally, if you're teaching jiu-jitsu, if you're showing somebody else some moves, you learn them way better because you think about them from a perspective that you generally don't. And so I
Right.
think that's applicable right here. It's a
Right.
similar thing in that if we're trying to impart our knowledge, trying to talk about things in a way that other people can understand, it'll help us grasp it better too.
Yeah, and it's kind of, you're doing things in, I guess, full speed, fast motion. You're not doing things in slow motion.
Right.
And so sometimes you're not verbalizing what you're actually doing and slowing down to kind of pick it apart and understand it. And a lot of times you're just so busy as an entrepreneur, you're not really dissecting your business,
Right.
and understanding what you're doing. And so there's a lot of similarities there to growing in any, art or any subject really.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, that's the thing that kind of I think we'll focus on a lot here.
So you want to go over?
Yeah, hit the other goals. Hit the other goals.
Yeah, you want to go over just what a business is, and just that there are different types of businesses.
Yeah, I think kind of what our idea of
Yeah.
it is, right? How we think it is. So yeah, I think that's a good idea. So kind of starting off with maybe different types of business structures at first, because ultimately at the beginning of starting something on your own, one of the decisions you're going to have to make outside of where you're going to focus and everything else, markets and all stuff that we'll get into later, but the first more operational type of decision you're going to have to make is how are you going to be structured?
Right. And let's say who our audience is going to be first too.
Okay.
Because we're trying to reach people that are aspiring to open a business, start a company, buy a company, maybe even someone who's not quite ready to do that, but they just want to learn about it. Maybe they're playing in stocks, but they're very um, investment minded. Um, but typically, private equity, when we say private equity, we're just talking about a company that is not a publicly owned business. You own it, so it's a private company. But you're going to typically get higher returns on your investments. So people tend to start kind of moving into businesses, as they learn more about investments, stocks, etc.
Yeah, and kind of, the other thing too is people in this category, they don't, like I said, they don't have to be business owners. They don't have to be entrepreneurs. They could be somebody that works in a corporate job but wants to start figuring out how to branch out on their own. I can relate. I've done that. I've figured out the path that worked for me to get out of a W-2 job and into something that's different.
I think that should be a whole episode.
And I think we can focus entirely on that transition.
Right.
It worked for me. It may not work for everybody, but it's a framework that you can begin to think about if you really have entrepreneurial desires and want to get away from golden handcuff type scenarios.
Because I think that's where everyone is kind of coming from. Typically, it's just, where do I start? Anytime someone asks a question to an entrepreneur that is an entrepreneur, it's just, how do I get going? They're just kind of, they know somebody's gotten over that hump and figured it out, and it's kind of fascinating. But when you look at it kind of starting from nowhere, it's just daunting.
It's quite daunting. I mean, I think it's a very daunting thing to even begin to think about. And as we've talked about before too, you have these things that you get used to, especially as you get used to having a paycheck and everything else, and your lifestyle begins to meet your income, and it makes it very, very difficult to break out of.
Right, exactly. So there can be a kind of sweet time to do it too. Not that you're ever too old to be an entrepreneur.
I think you can reverse a lot of things in your life too.
Yeah, exactly. If you understand what metrics you need to tweak, and getting your budgets tight, and just your requirements for cost of living low, that can go a long way too. Because a lot of times, not all the times, because a lot of times there are other costs and risks associated with the business, but so often a business is really just the person doing the work, especially a service company, which is just a business that's performing a service, like a lawn mowing business.
Right.
That would be a service company.
Right. And so there's, that's probably a good segue into kind of what we were talking about of business types. Like, so service business, and like you may have other ones such as product.
Right.
You have a whole business based around a product. And then, is that really all you got?
Pretty much. I mean, it's either those two or a mix of the two, I guess. But if it's a service business, that entrepreneur, the success of that business is really going to be related to their cost of living. I mean, you just have that person doing the work and what it takes to get them by, and if they can live on $2,000 a month, then their business only has to make $2,000 a month.
Right.
And so it has a much better chance of surviving. So anyway, there's a few metrics that you can tweak, regardless of what stage you're at in your life. But yeah, that's about the only two types.
I mean, I'm trying to rack my brain to think about what else you may have. I don't know what the
official MBA answer would be to types of businesses.
It's probably product and service. I don't know what else you can do, unless I'm just completely overthinking it right now. But I don't know what you do. But I would say the most common type of business is probably a service business too.
Right.
I mean, shadow of a doubt.
And it's the easiest to start. It's the least risky to start, typically.
You
just
can
go
make
out and
revenue
work.
all they want.
It's what you're doing at your job already. You're a service business.
Yeah.
If you're 1099, if you're not paid W-2, you're paid 1099, you're already a service business.
You are.
You're a consultant. So a service business is what you're doing right now. You're working, and if you want to put back money and invest, you just have to not spend everything you make. And if you were a company, you would call that your retained earnings. If you're not a company, you just call it your savings.
Right. You can view your life as a business. I mean, you really should.
And that's a good thing to do.
Yeah, you probably should. I mean, and also as far as like you are already in a service business. No matter what you're doing, if you have a job, you're selling yourself as a service.
Exactly.
I mean, the only way to have widgets making money for you is to sell a product or to hire people who then become a widget.
Right.
Basically.
Exactly.
Whenever you're selling out your employees as a product, there, it becomes the same thing.
And there's some security that comes typically with a job, but it's very limiting for investing and getting out of, kind of getting over that hump quickly. You can play the long game as far as, living cheap, putting as much of your income into a stock portfolio as you can, making a few investments along the way. And that's definitely a viable option, keeping your job and making side investments. It can be hard to really start a business, but it's
probably
very
the safest way to start
it's definitely the safest way to start. Definitely the safest way to start. But I think to most people listening, they're probably working in some sort of job and realizing that their time isn't, it's really hard to get their savings or retained earnings. And so if you're already a service business, you're already kind of set up. You're already set up to transition into working for yourself. The only difference is you have to go get the work instead of someone already providing it.
Well,
but you're basically a service business
and you think
as an employee.
And it's you really know the ropes of a service business too. You have to keep a timesheet. You have to report to somebody who would be your customer instead of your boss. You know like what you need to do to please these people, and if you need whatever you need to do to please your boss, you got to do something similar to please a customer. Except for maybe whenever you own your own business, you're more motivated to give better service, quicker service, make better use of your time. The thing is you possess the skills necessary. Anybody possesses the skills necessary if they have any sort of work experience to start a business on the side or full time if it's any sort of service. Products are a little bit different. They require a different set of skill sets than you actually learn as an employee most of the time, unless you're developing a product as that employee. But that skill set exists for everybody. I mean, it's not overly unique,
Right.
or
It's
special.
definitely not unique. There are a lot of people that work for themselves that make a lot of money that are very free and rich and not very smart.
Not very smart. Yeah. That's you kind of encounter them more than you think, don't you?
Right.
Some of these people. So, and that's the thing we want to make. That's the thing we want to share. I think is the fact that we kind of see these lessons all the time. We see these little nuggets of information that we want to document for our own purposes as much as anything. And it's we see people that we're like, how are they even having a successful business, acting like that, doing these things, but yet they do.
Right. And two, we just want to encourage people to know that things can manifest over time.
Yeah.
And pretty much everything that we've wanted to do has eventually happened. Really right now being our stock portfolio, our business, and living in Colorado.
Yeah. So just kind of maybe a little background on us too, without getting too in the weeds. We 6 years ago, something along those lines, we started talking to each other about how we would like to move to Colorado and operate a business that we owned together in the future. It is now the future. It's now 5 to 6 years later, and we're doing exactly that. And the main reason, I think, is because we talked about it all the time.
Yeah, it consumed us.
It consumed us. It was something that we didn't let die. And
that doesn't mean we were just always 24/7 working on it.
No. It just means it never died. It
never
never went away.
died. We always kept it alive.
Intentionally. Through basically, it all started between us. We used to just get together about once a week or so and talk about business. And that helped us kind of understand how each other worked and like concepts that we learned we could tell the other about.
Right, and it helped us start dreaming together. Eventually helped us make our first acquisition together.
Right.
Because we ended up going through several ideas that really didn't stick.
No. This is probably the fourth time that we've tried something.
Yeah.
I mean, legitimately, we've lost money on a couple. It's not anything that we just, we weren't successful first at bat. We struck out once. We got it on the second bat. It was just, but I think that's super common, and I think that a lot of people try one time and get discouraged.
Right, yeah, or they fell too big.
Uh-huh.
They don't start off small.
Yeah, they fail $100,000 big.
Yeah,
they don't fail $5,000.
Yeah.
And for most people, that's probably where you should start.
Or they take a risk that they don't weigh how bad it can get. And that's something you really have to do is sit down and go, how bad could it get?
Right.
Am I willing to go through that?
Right.
And could I live through that and not be a depressed, miserable person?
Right.
And if you feel like you can and you can keep your head up, you can go through that, keep your head up and not feel sorry for yourself, then you should move forward because you've already decided that the worst isn't really something that would take you out. So, and then the best that could happen is so rewarding.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, ultimately, freedom, I think, is the goal. It's the underlying principle behind like what keeps you going through like some sucky times.
Right. That's how we were able to move.
Yeah.
Was the freedom of being entrepreneurs.
Yeah, it didn't matter. We could do what we wanted.
And we are going to organically, like I'm finding myself encouraging entrepreneurship. We're not necessarily encouraging it, but we know that we're trying to tailor to an audience that is seeking that. So if you're seeking that already, we're going to definitely be pushing people in that direction, not because we're encouraging risk, but just because this is a show about becoming an entrepreneur.
Right.
So.
And the thing that I tend to hear a lot of whenever I listen to podcasts is a lot of theoretical type of advice that may not come from a practicality perspective. And I don't want to do that.
Right.
I want to like give practical type of things that I've learned that would have made me feel better about taking the plunge a lot earlier.
Right.
That's the thing is like there's things that are not good, there's things that are good, but how do we think about these things and how do we basically justify them? I think that's important.
Right. And how do you take that first step?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not a step of, just do it. It's the step of think about all these things and is it right for you?
Right.
At this point in your life, 5 years from now, it may be right for you. There's no telling. I mean, I think you can't just say like one thing works for everybody. It's kind of got to be this framework of how to think about things and decide for yourself.
Right.
That's what I would like to try and work to as well. So, we'll get there.
Right.
Let's see. So, you want to talk real quick about business types since we mentioned it earlier?
I don't know. I mean, we could just save all that kind of for a whole nother. Because I was
thinking that might be another episode.
Yeah,
actually.
yeah.
I think that might be another episode.
Yeah.
'Cause we're kind of hitting. I think our goal here is somewhere around the 20 to 30 minute mark. Something you can listen on a commute. Basically, you can start and finish, and getting in and out of the car one time.
Sure.
I think at least initially, something that makes sense. And I think the other thing we're going to try and do
is something that isn't overwhelming. I think
something that's not overwhelming.
We're trying to really be entry level.
Yeah, and so we're kind of tossing around names, and I don't think it hurts to say these things. But we're thinking about entry level entrepreneur is one thing. We're titling it as I think we still consider ourselves entry level entrepreneurs. I think you have to have 20 plus years of experience to really have something to call yourself, even proficient at the game,
Sure.
Other than that, that's kind of, we think we've kind of got beyond phase one, and we're kind of eking into phase two of entrepreneurship, where it gets a little fun.
Yeah, and I think we too both find people approaching us about starting their own businesses. So we kind of have found ourselves answering the same questions and seeing the same sort of, and we, you know, that's not too long ago for us. So it's very fresh. We know what it's like starting that journey.
That's a good point too. And this is not information that we want to share in 15 years when we forget the context.
Right.
We want to share it now while there's still context, while there's still things that are not going great. You know, ultimately, like I feel like it comes across in a different way.
Right, because
you think the whole thing.
The audience will see, you know, problems that we're dealing with in real time.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is not candid by any means. I don't think we're not necessarily trying to open up the books to everybody, but I don't think
absolutely not.
We're trying to make sure that we're honest about the things we're talking about and make them applicable, and share real world experiences. So that's the goal, right?
Right.
That's the goal. Let's see where we're at. So that's like 21 minutes. I think that's probably pretty close to being on top of things. All right, so this is episode 1, untitled, but it will be titled somewhere, and we'll get the next one out as soon as we can.
Cool. All right,
later.
That's it.